Hello, and welcome to a conversation on the Daily Bern. I'm your host, Eric Miller, joined today by an awesome progressive from the great state of Georgia running. He had run previously for a House seat. Now he's running in the jungle primary, if you will, or jungle election for the special election Senate seat from the great state of Georgia, Richard Dien Winfield. How you doing, Richard?
Doing great. How are you?
Doing well. Thanks for taking some time to chat with me. I saw you on the Hill a little while ago, and I just thought you were super impressive. And then I sort of looked into your candidacy, and it's one of those special elections where there's like 700 candidates running. But I think you're probably the most progressive in that field. And I want to kind of dive into your platform a little bit. But you're also a philosopher. You have a great podcast, which I certainly want to make mention of. But let me just kind of start with the beginning. I mentioned the House race, but what inspired you to run either for that or for this? What motivated you to run for elected office?
Well, I think in both cases, I felt that the abiding failure of our nation to recognize our social rights had led to such an extreme degree of social insecurity as to fuel a very anti-democratic nationalist movement that was putting all of our freedoms in jeopardy, and that it was time to try to make use of a candidacy to change the political conversation and bring this neglected focus to the top of the agenda. And to some degree, it's not obviously original. It's going back to the kind of agenda that FDR spoke about in 1944 in his last address to Congress, and that MLK reiterated with the Poor People's Campaign.
Yeah, great. Can you talk about, you have in your platform a new social bill of rights, a lot of employee bill of rights, and we can sort of talk about some of those things. But, what is your perspective on sort of our current state of, we got the creep of fascism. What's our current state of rights as it relates to our, representative democracy, as it were?
Well, I think we are really at the edge of a cliff. And, I am very concerned about whether this election is going to take place, and if it takes place, whether the results are going to be respected by our incumbent president, who's told us already that he wants to put it off, that he wants to challenge the only safe way to vote, which is by mail under conditions of pandemic, that he's not going to recognize the authority of the election if he loses. And I think he's going to call out into the streets his armed, let's call them what they are, fascist militia, and attempt to wipe out the results of the election to the extent that it's democratic. And I think we have to be very worried about this and be prepared not to let him become master of the streets afterwards. But I think before then, we have to try to change the tide in terms of the political conversation, because I think the extreme health crisis caused by the pandemic, also the advancing climate crisis that is burning, many, many cities and creating havoc with multiple hurricanes and the like. All of this is bearing down on us like a freight train. And then there's that economic catastrophe of this unnecessary worldwide depression that has been fostered by the mismanagement of the pandemic. And then on top of that, the eruption of a racial justice movement provoked by our continued failure to end the entrenched racial, and I might also say gender disadvantage. And I think the solutions for addressing all of these problems really consist in fulfilling a social rights agenda that's anchored in a federal job guarantee to wipe out unemployment and poverty income, and capped by legal care for all, to a large degree end our toll road justice system, where wealth determines our standing before the law, and to provide a equivalent to Medicare for all with regard to legal expenses, so that we all have our dream team in civil and criminal cases and can stand up for our rights.
Right on. Yeah. Can you talk about how that, that ties to Roosevelt's second Bill of Rights, right? Yeah. You're modeling your platform largely on that. Can you talk about, just talk about that a little bit?
Well, remember, our Constitution does not give us a right to a livelihood. It does not give us a right to health care. It does not give us a right to housing. It doesn't give us a right to balancing work and family. It doesn't give us a right to even the playing field between employer and employee. It doesn't give us a right to really legal representation in all cases. It doesn't give us a right to art and culture. But these are fundamental human rights as recognized by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And they are necessary if we're going to be able to escape oppression at home and in society that blocks our opportunity to participate as equal self-governing citizens. And that is what I am trying to bring to the fore here. And the real anchor of it all is to fulfill the right to livelihood. And that requires a federal job guarantee. Now, I was identified as by the nation when I ran in 2018 as the first candidate standing up for a federal job guarantee. At that time, in 2016, Bernie Sanders did not stand up for a federal job guarantee. He came around to it in this race, but he didn't really put it out there as much as I think he should, because I think it really is crucial to all of the policies that we need if we're going to deal with our increasing inequalities and all the other traumas that we're facing now. And I think it's crucial to see how it relates to all these other policies, because it does wipe out unemployment by doing what the WPA tried to do on a much more fleeting and smaller scale, namely offer a job to anyone who can't find a full-time job in the market at a fair wage, providing the goods and services we need. Back then, it was a matter of electrification. Now it would be things like extending broadband for all, which is crucial in a pandemic if you're going to work remotely or study remotely or have access to anything. We need, of course, to have an army of contact tracers. We need to build a new green infrastructure. We need to expand our school and health services. We need to ensure that no one is homeless and provide decent housing to everyone, because you can't shelter in place if you don't have a roof over your head. We need to provide public transportation. And of course, we need to bring the arts and culture to everyone and make it accessible.
Right on.
So there's a whole litany of things. And I think it's important to realize how this is crucial, not only in a sense, providing maximum consumer demand, which is great for vitalizing the economy. It lifts the fear of firing, because in America, it's harder to stand up for your rights on the job and sort of fight against sexual harassment at work, racial discrimination, any kind of employer misconduct. Because if you're fired, you face destitution, you face losing benefits like healthcare, which is not true in any other developed country in the world, and you have no guaranteed representation in civil cases. Well, the job guarantee provides an answer to part of lifting the fear of firing,
right,
and allows us to stand up for our rights. And it's crucial for Medicare for all, because Medicare for all is going to end up with the dwindling away of the private for-profit health insurance industry. I don't think you have to ban it. I think it will go away by itself, because no one is going to be stupid enough to maintain their private insurance plans when a genuine Super Medicare for all plan would have no copays, no deductibles, no premiums, cover all mental, physical, dental, long-term care. And if we want to do it fairly, the federal job guarantee ensures that anyone who loses employment in the for-profit private health insurance industry will have a job awaiting them. And by the way, when I speak about the federal job guarantee, there are two other components to it that I'm afraid not even Bernie Sanders among Democrats supports. One is that we have to think of a fair wage, not a living wage. A living wage of $15 an hour is a poverty wage that invites homelessness. According to everyone, you need at least $20 an hour. And in addition, you have to not only have the fair minimum wage keep pace with inflation, it has to keep pace with the rising wealth of the nation, the rising national productivity, because only that will put a cap on the widening income and wealth inequality. And then you also have to ensure that those who cannot work, those who are disabled, those who can't work in a pandemic because we don't have safe employment to offer people for a while, and those who are retired, they have to have equivalent to a fair minimum wage. $20 an hour comes to about $41,600. That's almost doubling, almost tripling Social Security benefits, which are disgracefully poverty benefits. So with this, in one blow, we wipe out unemployment. We wipe out poverty. I don't like talking about strengthening the middle class, because if you aim at strengthening the middle class, you're allowing for there to be an underclass.
Right.
We want to eliminate poverty, period. And this is crucial.
Yeah. And, obviously in sustainable energy, installations, like you mentioned, internet broadband, right? Green New Deal has, jobs program in it. Any real sort of climate change legislation ought to have that. It's funny that you mentioned the poverty thing, because this is totally anecdotal, but it's a bit of a tangent. I was watching CNN earlier today, and they were reviewing Joe Biden's executive orders and his new manufacturing plans or whatever. Yeah. And the millionaire paid by billionaires on CNN basically said, how is this going to affect the middle class and the rich? And I just made such a note of it. I'm like, it's just a giant, they just neglect that there's even, like you say, that other tier, right? They don't even acknowledge that it exists.
Yeah. I think, by the way, if we want to speak about a fair minimum wage as really providing adequate income, you have to recognize that it really is not itself sufficient unless one takes into account the costs of a family, which means one has to have a child allowance, which will provide the extra funding you need to support having children or having dependents. And according to the government, you need $900 a month for a child. So we need to have a monthly $900 child allowance, which should go to everyone. I don't think there should be any means tests. I think we should think in terms of rights, which benefit everyone. And then we have very progressive taxation, if we want to use taxation to make these public investments, which means not funding these things with payroll taxes, which Bernie Sanders seemed to support, but rather eliminate payroll taxes, frankly, which after all, only employees pay. And it's, as someone has said, an invitation to introduce robots who don't pay payroll taxes, but instead to put the entire tax burden on the top 10% of wealth and income, who control almost 80% of our national wealth and have complete freedom from federal taxation for the bottom 90%.
Right. Just transpose it almost. Yeah. So when you talk about that policy, right, that obviously, is progressive, and, I'm down with it. And probably most people watching this are interested in that. And, that's sort of the utopian state. That's what you fight for, right? Even if we don't get there, you make progress, right? But when you're talking to constituents in Georgia, right, and Georgia is seen as a deeply red state, what you're saying is very people-centered, and it should be nonpartisan, but they've been propagandized, and, they fearmonger, how are you going to pay for it, et cetera, et cetera. How do you make that argument to, just Joe Sixpack when you're presenting, sort of your platform, and how receptive they tend to be?
Well, look, the problem is getting out to the voters, getting out to Joe Sixpack in general.
Right.
We're stuck with most in-person campaigning suspended. I'm not awash with money. And of course, even if you have money, what do you have? A soundbite to put on TV, et cetera. So it's a real challenge to have a chance to make an argument. But when I do make an argument, when I do speak to people, and when I speak to union meetings, when I've gone door-to-door canvassing before the pandemic struck and the like, I always get, frankly, a positive response.
Right.
And polls have been taken in Georgia that show that when people are asked about a federal job guarantee, about which no one has heard and don't have any idea what the hell it is, a majority support it. A majority also support Medicare for all if they get to hear what it is. And I think, when I ran 2 years ago, I faced this woman who was putting herself forward as a rural Georgian and so forth. I mean, I could say, look, I'm another boy from Queens. And of course, the people in Georgia who have deserted the Democratic Party love that other boy from Queens who promises them to bring jobs back to America. But he has an empty promise regarding jobs. I'm giving a job guarantee. And I think there's a response to that. Same thing with regard to unions. One of the main planks of my platform is to do something the Democratic Party has failed to do, and the union movement is failing to do. Namely, we need to have something akin to 100% unionization in all enterprises with multiple employees. We can't go through with a system from the Wagner Act when you've got to get cards and hold elections. We need to have automatic elections for union representatives in every workplace. And it should happen automatically, just as we automatically, maybe even this time with Trump in office, have an election for Congress and the presidency without people first having to sign cards and so forth in order to go forward with the election. And then we also need to put elected representatives of employees in 50% of the seats on corporate boards, as they've done in certain European countries. Because from within, we can give employees a fair opportunity to engage in governance so that CEOs no longer make 300 times what employees do, so that they no longer ship employment overseas in search of the lowest denominator in pay, so they don't dismember corporations to pad the stockholder portfolios, etc. I mean, we can make a vast change in the situation of labor and balance the playing field between employers and employees, as it has not yet been done in America.
Yeah, I love that. And, so how do you transition? The Democratic Party historically has been, I'm just going to say, beholden to corporate donors and paid to lose and feckless. So how do you go from that paid, defensive, at best position to actually implementing any of the things? How can we get there?
Well, we don't have a parliamentary system, as in many European countries, particularly those with proportional representation, where the party apparatus has control over who runs for office and has control over campaign finances. Here, because of the primary system, anyone can run who files in the name of the party and fight to transform the direction of the party. Bernie Sanders did it. Even though in a sense he's outside the Democratic Party as an independent, nonetheless, he did that. And he came very close in both 2016 and this year, and showed that without having support from PACs, one could credibly challenge the party establishment and almost make it to really fundamentally transform this country and the Democratic Party. I think it is possible to do that. I think it's harder to try to operate outside the two parties and run as a third party candidate. I think our majoritarian system makes it extremely difficult for third parties to succeed. So I think a viable strategy is to try to work from within, take advantage of the primary system, and run as someone with the bold social rights agenda we need, and try to change the attitudes of the electorate. I mean, after all, my situation is that of a long shot. I have not been anywhere as successful as Bernie Sanders was, to say the least. But I'm out there. I'm trying to get the word out. And I don't think it's a waste of time, because I think I'm getting an opportunity, for instance, to be on your show, to be in other venues, to speak about these issues. And I think that's crucial as a seed for the future. And I think in this jungle election, things are so divided. The establishment front runners are fairly weak candidates, to tell the truth, that there might be a chance. I mean, who knows? This is a crazy electoral season. We don't know what will happen. And it wouldn't take that much to squeak through if I could have a lucky breakthrough so that I would be noticed and get the message out.
Yeah. And and win, lose, or draw, you're furthering the conversation and pulling it left, right? So, you get other races like Shahid Buttar in San Francisco running against Nancy Pelosi. That's an uphill battle, and she hasn't had a primary challenge, but because of that race, that is impacting her behavior, right? Win, lose, or draw, right? So, you're here.
And I think I'm putting out some ideas that other candidates have not, or not to any great degree, like a federal job guarantee, like employee co-determination, like legal care for all. And no one has heard of these things by and large. but I think they're very persuasive. I mean, you can quickly understand how they are solutions to grave blockages of opportunity
Right.
that are putting our whole democracy in jeopardy.
Yeah, you mentioned two or three there. Let's that I'm not familiar with. Go into them. What was you said coded German name? What is that?
Yeah, well, when I speak about employee co-determination, that is a name often given in Europe to this policy of having corporate seats divided between, well, stockholders and employees, where there's a 50-50 split.
Right.
And that makes it, and you can see how that makes a huge difference in how corporations are going to operate. And I think that is something that goes beyond what unions can do on their own,
right,
and what ordinary labor legislation can do.
Right.
So I think there are three aspects of evening the playing field, if we can speak in those terms, between employee and employer. One is we have to change our labor laws. You know, we can't allow firing people without reason, without grounds that are subject to due process. They don't do this in Europe or elsewhere. We can't allow mandatory overtime, which is prohibited in other nations. We must require paid leave, paid parental leave of 9 months, paid vacations of 1 month, as they do in the European Union. Right? These are basic features, and we need automatic union elections at any enterprise. And we also need to bar mandatory, arbitration, which many contracts have. We have to get rid of non-compete clauses, which many employers are shoving down the throats of employees, so they can't work in the field if they leave the company. Right? I mean, these are really egregious restrictions on employee rights.
Yeah.
And one other important thing, which I face as a state employee at the university, is that employees theoretically have a right to run for office, but in practice, you by and large cannot afford to do it for three reasons. One, if you're in a serious race, you have to take off from work, meaning you have no income for the duration of the campaign. Secondly, in America, you lose important benefits like healthcare for the duration of the campaign, for yourself and your family. And then thirdly, for most people, not a tenured professor like me, but everyone else, you can't expect your job to be waiting for you.
Yeah.
So how many employees are there who are really running for Congress or for the Senate? It's all people who are retired, independently wealthy, independent professionals, businessmen, doctors, lawyers, etc., but not employees who make up 95% of breadwinners in this country. That should be part of an employee bill of rights, that you get replacement income during the duration of the campaign, and you are guaranteed to get your job back if you lose.
Right. Yeah, there are the pay that a public servant would make, an elected official would make is often less than what a, sort of middle-class professional might make, right? So you might even be taking a pay cut on top of what you're saying there, right?
Well, in my case, if I get elected to the Senate or to Congress, my salary almost doubles. They're not so badly paid.
Right. Yeah, there was a race in Georgia 7th, Nabila Islam, and younger candidate, she was trying to get her campaign finances to cover her Medicare, her medical expenses. Right?
That's right.
Because of what you just said, right? I think her case is still moving through the courts or whatever, so that's something to keep an eye on.
Of course, that's one of the important things about Medicare for All. We separate health insurance from employment, which is good for employees. It's also good for business. After all, the American auto industry faced big competitive difficulties because the Japanese automakers, the European automakers didn't have to pay for any health benefits. That was covered nationally. But the U.S. automakers had to, because the auto workers had fought tooth and nail for decent health benefits provided by employers.
Right. Let's talk about Medicare for All and some of the one of the ways that Bernie framed it this time around that he didn't last time around, I think, is probably where you sit as well, probably even more so, is the freedom it provides, like you're kind of talking about now, right? Yeah. So we have rural hospitals closing. I'm sure that's a problem in Georgia. I would be stunned if it was not.
No, it's a great problem in Georgia.
So
we have one of the worst healthcare systems in America, and that means in the developed world.
Right.
The rates of infant and maternal mortality, particularly among African Americans, are genuinely disgraceful. Much worse than many third world nations.
That's shameful. Can you talk about the freedom that Medicare for All would, Medicare for All as one of many things in your platform would provide, our citizenry?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are four fundamental advantages of Medicare for All compared to Obamacare or any other competing system. First of all, it allows everyone to have the same comprehensive, equal healthcare coverage because it should, unlike Medicare as it exists, it should cover all necessary physical, dental, mental, and long-term care with no copays, no deductibles, and no premiums. Because as we all know, Medicare and Medicaid have premiums and deductibles, do not cover everything.
Right.
Many people can't afford to use them. Secondly, under the proper Medicare for All system, you have complete freedom to go to any doctor or healthcare practitioner you want, which we all know is not allowed by for-profit insurance programs, which restrict your choices.
Right.
Thirdly, it gets rid of all this ridiculous, unnecessary overhead.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but before you get to number three, so what you said right there, it's complete freedom of choice.
Yeah.
And yet, in a very Orwellian way, the right-wing framing is death panels, right? It's government, partitioned healthcare, right? So it's, but you're so right. It's just complete freedom because there's equity, and you go to any doctor. I'm sorry to interrupt, but
and by the way, in terms of the costs, I mean, Medicare for All is not the system that has been used by most developed nations to ensure that healthcare is a right. Some have used, the model that Britain pioneered, which is tantamount to making veterans hospitals be how we operate as a healthcare system, with doctors and health facilities being owned by the state, employed by the state. That would require a huge investment to be implemented here, as well as a kind of monopoly that might not be the best idea in terms of having, complete accountability. But Medicare for All allows us to keep everything as it is, but make it lean and mean and efficient and just, because we can get rid of all the overhead of for-profit insurance systems with their proliferation of competing plans that have to be advertised. We have to pay dividends to stockholders, super salaries to CEOs. And then you have doctors' offices, healthcare providers with gigantic clerical staffs trying to deal with this cornucopia of these proliferating plans. You get rid of all of that. And then fourthly, we can then negotiate in strength to have our healthcare costs and pharmaceutical costs match those of every other developed nation, which means we cut it in half. We save $1.7 trillion a year right away. So anyone who says, well, this is going to cost a huge amount, that's ridiculous. It's going to be much more economical, and it will give everyone decent health care. I mean, it's a no-brainer. And the same system would work with legal expenses if we have legal care for all. As you know, the Sixth Amendment to the Constitution grants the right to legal counsel in criminal cases. But that is implemented in a way where those who are poor, who cannot hire their dream team, are stuck with overworked, poorly funded legal care or court-appointed attorneys who have hardly any time to see them. And in civil cases, which concern all of the harms we're facing and involve crucial things concerning work and family and discrimination and harassment, etc., 86% of people don't have a lawyer and they get screwed in court. So with legal care for all, it's all covered by a government legal insurance program with no copays, no deductibles, no premiums. And if we're going to pay for it through taxes, we stick it to the top 10%, who will hardly notice the burden, or will notice it much less than everyone else.
Yeah, and they would they would be benefiting from all of these elevated social programs as well, right? Infrastructure and so forth. So
that's why when you're fighting for rights, you're doing things that are benefits for everyone. We're not talking about the humiliating and divisive approach of means tests, where various things are offered only to people who fall below a certain income and the like. We should take the approach we took to public education. Namely, you don't have to pay for it. Even if you have enough money to be able to pay for it, that's irrelevant. But of course, we have to have our public schools be properly funded, equitably, not based upon, real estate values and real estate taxes, but by, I think, equitable federal funding. And I like Bernie Sanders' idea of raising teacher salaries to at least $60,000 a year. Because there are two things, and the only two things that have been shown to have an effect in improving education. And that is teacher salaries and class size. And now, under the threat of the pandemic, we need to cut class sizes in half, if not into thirds. Let's keep that permanent. Increase our teaching staff. And that will, frankly, vastly improve education in the public sphere in this country.
Yeah. How about your position on, if you were able to stomach any of the RNC, they continually talked about choice when it came to school, right? That's the buzzword, right?
Yeah.
Versus
Yeah.
public school and public funding, right? Obviously that's an ongoing battle. Can you talk about that a little bit, being an educator?
First of all, it's completely fraudulent to say that you're giving people choice when you use public funds to subsidize private education.
All right.
Because in subsidizing private education, you're in no way ensuring that there are enough seats reserved for every student in the private educational system. You're basically diverting funds from the public schools, who have to open their doors to everyone. And I think for that reason, we should not give any aid to private education in the lower years. It should all be going to the public schools, which should be of a quality second to none. And that's how we offer fair opportunities. And I think we should not encourage people to homeschool, which I find it very questionable. It's largely used by people who want to escape having their children have to mix with undesirable poor children of, for them, dubious ethnicity, or to escape certain, well, maybe less restrictive views than they want to shove down their children's throats. So I think we need to ensure that people go to public school, and make the public schools as great as they can be. Right
on. Yeah, imagine actually investing in these things rather than just constantly being on the defensive. The profit motive is like running water. It's always going to find a way, and we always have to be on the defense of it. But what you're suggesting is just the opposite. It's investing. It's being forward thinking.
And the other side of it is to think. Look, I grew up as a middle class kid. I started off in Queens. My parents were more modestly living than when they were able finally to move to the suburbs as the one member of their family who managed to make that transition. I went to a public suburban high school, etc. My parents took me to other things. I had piano lessons and this and that. Not quite as much as I was taking my 3 kids to as a parent here, but we need to have all of these things offered in the public schools free of charge.
Yeah.
To avoid that kind of inequality. In other words, all the music lessons, all the dance lessons, all the cultural things, all the sports things should be provided free of charge in after-school programs at the schools. And of course, everyone needs broadband in all their homes, so they can study. And I think these are crucial measures of allowing everyone to do well. And I agree with Bernie Sanders that we need to make public education at the post-secondary level free. But I think you have to add something that they do in Europe. We have to add stipends that cover the costs of living of a full-time student. Because otherwise you cannot afford to go to a tuition-free school. My mother went to Hunter College in New York City, which back in the day was completely free. There was no tuition. She was living with her parents. She was 16 years actually old at the time and working full-time. My father, on the other hand, he was admitted to City College, but he couldn't afford to go. He had to work. He had to help support his parents, etc. We need to give living stipends to everyone.
Yeah.
So that they can
roll back that stuff, right? So it's clearly effective. They, you never hear them, saying, "Oh, we're giving away they never roll it back." So, no country that has Medicare for All has sort of turned back to, well, let's go to a for-profit model. That's better, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, think of Margaret Thatcher. She never dismantled it, right?
Right, exactly. Yep. I want to share your website real quick. So it's winfieldforsenate.com. And the reason I want to share it, if I can figure this out here, bear with me. You have a podcast, right? So let me get rid of this little name taggy deal. So winfieldforsenate.com, you have a mechanism to donate here, which is the most crucial thing. We didn't mention it, but I think it probably goes without saying that you don't take any corporate PAC money, grassroots funded campaign. So if you can throw Richard some donations, that would be super helpful, right? $10, $100, whatever you can afford. But I wanted to highlight your podcast, right? So you have a really great podcast where you go in depth on many of these issues, and we're just kind of scratching the surface. I feel like I could listen to you talk all day about these things, Richard. Like there's the one that just came out this week is on reparations, and these are about an hour plus, something like that. Good deep dives on, actual issues, real thoughtful, real comprehensive. So, if you're appreciating what Richard's saying, I encourage you to go check out this America Unchained and, learn more about the policies that he's talking about. And again, his website, winfieldforsenate.com. Please go make a donation.
Let me mention one other resource.
Please.
I wrote a book after my last campaign where I tried to lay out in detail the argument for the kind of policies I'm putting forward and a lot of factual data to support the kind of concrete policies I'm putting forward. It's called Democracy Unchained. So
right on.
Take a look.
Go check that out as well. Awesome work. So let's talk a little bit about the logistics of the race. Obviously policy-wise, you're solid and you have the most bold progressive policies. I think before we jumped on, you said there's nearly 20 candidates in this race, from a libertarian to a Green Party to, the normal slate of Republicans to Democrats, right? It's November 3rd. Is there any kind of debate you want to talk about the logistics? How can people vote? How can they help you?
Yeah. Well, in Georgia, it's really crucial that you prepare in advance how you're going to vote, because the state government, with its Republican administration, is doing everything they can really to discourage people from voting. They're doing everything they can to call into question mail-in balloting. They're not sending in the forms to obtain a mail-in ballot to everyone, as they should be doing. It's up to the local election boards to do that. So people have to go out and request these, and of course, make sure they get in. And, it's unsafe in Georgia, where the pandemic is out of control. It's really out of control now. But it's out of control also because a lot of people are not taking any protective measures on their own. It's not just our governor and his state legislative accomplices. It's much of the public, including especially students in the university town like Athens, where we're becoming a hotspot because of their failure to take any real precautions. But you have to get there to vote. In this election, it's extremely likely there will be a runoff, which will take place on January 5th. Okay. And of course, the problem is, how can voters know who the candidates are and what they stand for when you're facing 21 candidates, where in-person campaigning is largely shut down, where the media are not covering anyone but the 4 establishment figures who are awash with money, who don't stand for much, frankly, and have very little to say about policy. And it's just very difficult for the public to be informed. So even if you can escape the effects of voter suppression, your right to vote is empty if you can't know who you're voting for and what they stand for.
Right.
So I think we have to completely revamp our electoral system to guarantee every candidate the means and opportunity to put their platform in detail before every voter. And meanwhile, I will ask voters, well, take a look, inform yourself. Go to my campaign website. Take a look at the others. You'll see there's a big difference. That's what you can try to do. I realize in Georgia, like elsewhere in America, many people don't have internet, broadband.
Right.
You can't rely on the press, which is withering away, especially outside the metro areas. Local TVs have virtually no news programs. National TV hardly has any genuine investigative reporting that delves into platform points and debates them in any serious manner. And unfortunately, not too many people view podcasts or look necessarily at YouTube channels, although I hope many will look at this and at others of a similar kind.
Although that, that is the growing, right? You talk about the students in Athens and whatnot, but, the younger generation triangulates their information more from multiple sources, and, it's just a new media landscape. And you could even argue that they're better informed as a result of that, right?
One shocking thing, though, is how little younger people vote. At least that's been the pattern. I mean, their degree of participation is staggeringly low, which I think is kind of disgraceful, and I hope that will change. And after all, this year is a wake-up call for all of us. Yeah. Everything is on the line. People have to take advantage of what political freedoms they still have and make their voice count before it's too late.
Yeah, let me pick your brain on that. We mentioned it at the top about the creeping fascism. So you're a philosophy professor. Let me get your perspective. Like, it's speculative, but how does this go down? He wins or loses on November 3rd. What does that look like come January 20th?
I mean, look, I think we have to expect that Donald Trump will not respect the Constitution, will not respect the outcome of the election if it goes against him, as I certainly hope it will. And the Republican Party has shown itself to be, by and large, completely a spineless accomplice to whatever he wants to do, with the exception of maybe Mitt Romney to some degree and a small group of Lincoln Republicans. But other than that, one has to worry. And of course, there have been news reports of infiltration of white supremacists in our police forces, in our army, as of course is taking place in a similar way in Germany. And I think that's worrisome. I think we have to be aware that this is our greatest domestic terrorist threat. And it's a fifth column that is intent on subverting our democracy and all our rights. And we cannot let them be victorious under the umbrella of their leader, Donald Trump. And I think we have to be aware that, we are facing an election with a president who is saying things that no other president in our history has ever said with regard to openly disrespecting the electoral process, openly courting interference from foreign powers. I mean, we're in a completely different situation. And we have to make sure that we win the election decisively and that we then protect our win, as we must, and be vigilant. And make sure our local governments are going to do what they can to not allow our democracy and everything else to be overturned. Because we are at the midnight hour.
Yeah.
And I'll mention one thing also about the rise of this kind of, to put it in a benign way, anti-democratic nationalism throughout the developed world. It's taken place also in what might be considered the most progressive social democratic nations, like Sweden, Norway, Denmark. They all have rising anti-democratic nationalist movements that are villainizing immigrants, who of course are pouring into these countries that are affluent and take care of their citizens. And one of the reasons they're doing it, I think that's a fundamental explanation for what's happening, is that although these nations have publicly instituted Medicare, free college, etc., very generous unemployment benefits, they do not have a job guarantee. So people have reason to fear for their jobs in all these countries. And that economic anxiety, in face of all of the economic developments taking place in the world with the rise of China, etc., involves an anxiety that is fueling this kind of anti-democratic nationalism. And I think it's crucial to take seriously the role of a federal job guarantee to provide ground zero of economic independence and security to everyone as something that provides a major cure to the situation we're in. and
Right.
something we have to recognize as having that role as well. We can't have comprehensive immigration reform unless we ensure that no one has any reason to think their livelihood is in jeopardy when we give legal status to our 11 million undocumented. A federal job guarantee and all of the empowerments of labor go a long way in removing that kind of fear that fuels the villainization of immigrants that Donald Trump has been making such great use of.
Yeah. Boy, that's great. And that sidesteps that, projection and Jung's shadow, right? So you don't have to do the self-analysis as to why you're otherizing, immigrants or whatever. You can actually just step it by doing, by filling that hole, like you said, with a guaranteed jobs program. So you're not at jeopardy by the other in that context, right? And that was Hitler's, it was German pride, World War I, we got our asses kicked, let's not do it again. That's what he was motivated, and that's what's happening now. I don't want to keep you all day, but since we're kind of on this, like, how do you, as a professor, right, we're also in this anti-intellectualism, right? There's this willful ignorance is celebrated versus venerable folks like yourself being, listened to even, right? How are we in this? How do we remedy that? Is that even possible?
I mean, I've encountered this a little bit, not in terms of any of the voters themselves, but in terms of my opponents, my primary opponents. In my last election, one of them kept on calling me the professor with a certain matter of contempt. I've encountered that a little bit in this race. But frankly, I think, frankly, professors are respected by people who don't have as much education as they would like. They are hungry for education, frankly. And I don't find it a problem in any respect. It doesn't really pan out like that. It's something used by others. But I think when you deal with people who are living on the edge, who have not been properly educated, they're aware of the value of education. They know they've lost out, and they respect people who have had the opportunity to become well-educated. So I wouldn't take this anti-intellectualism too seriously as a huge obstacle.
You do see
I think it's more a question we have to think about the issues. And I think in our public education, we need to have philosophy as part of the curriculum.
Yeah.
In high schools, certainly, and also in middle schools. It can be done, and it should be done.
Yeah. I mean, you do see who's in the White House, right? Speaking of anti-intellectualism.
Yeah, well, that's for sure. That's for sure.
It spells 3 words for what that's worth.
Yeah.
So, I mean, what a blessing it would be to have someone like Richard in public service serving the public, right? So, November 3rd, obviously, he's on the ballot in the state of Georgia, statewide, Senate race. You can vote for him. You can donate. I assume you have mechanisms for people to volunteer, send emails, calls, etc.
On the website.
Yeah. So that's one of the cool things. Anyone around the country can get involved in your campaign and help out. So, if you're inspired by what Richard is saying, and how wouldn't you be, right? Please reach out and make a donation and offer some time. It's campaigns like this that, man, if we would be a blessed country if we had, like I said, people like Richard serving us, and that's the job, right? So again, the website is winfieldforsenate.com. Go check out America Unchained podcast. Awesome content there. I'm sort of sifting through it myself. I'd love to have you back on, Richard, win, lose, or draw, about any one of these things. I think you're a brilliant man. So I appreciate your perspective, and I'd love to have you back on again at any point. So
thanks for having me on to have this opportunity, because such opportunities are few and far to find in our political system, alas.
Yeah, here, improving over time. So November 3rd, vote against the fascists, vote for Richard. Winfieldforsenate.com. Thanks, Rich, for taking the time to talk with me. I hopefully will talk to you again soon.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Bye.
And thank our audience. Take care. Bye.
Bye.